Let's read our text here. We're in Matthew chapter 8. Steve read it a little bit earlier. We'll repeat for a moment and jump right in. When Jesus came down from the mountainside, large crowds followed him. And a man with leprosy came and knelt before him and said, "Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean." And Jesus reached out his hand and he touched the man and he said, "I am willing. Be clean." And immediately he was cleansed of his leprosy. Then Jesus said to him, "See that you don't tell anyone, but go, show yourself to the priest, and offer the gift Moses commanded as a testimony to them." Matthew chapter 8, verses 1 through 4, if you want to follow along. Most of us have known moments of misery. And in fact, maybe you're going through a point of misery even now. Maybe you were in an accident. Maybe it was going through giving birth, childbirth. Maybe a divorce or a breakup, a kidney stone. Yes, I saw a hand there, yeah. Larry, that was just last year, wasn't it? You went through that with your kidney stone. Still going through it? No? Okay. I was thinking about, for me personally, again, a relative scale here. Please bear this in mind. But I get poison ivy by running past it. Okay? I mean, I get it all over my body. It gets in my bloodstream to the point I really do get very sick and have to get on steroids in a hurry. But if it gets out of control, there are open sores. It was the last time it really got bad, I couldn't help but think of leprosy. Okay, it was just that way. With one difference, and that was that I knew that in 2 or 3 weeks, having had this happen multiple times before in my life, if I didn't die or I didn't scratch off my arm or my leg in the next 2 weeks, that I would be out of the woods. And I would stay out of it from that point on. And I know that some of you are going through misery right now. You know what a depression of your spirit that it has caused. And it is hard physically, it is hard socially, it is hard mentally, maybe hard spiritually. I want us to go ahead and think about leprosy for just a minute. And many of us have heard the story from the Bible before, so I won't take a long time to dwell on Hansen's disease and all that it causes, but certainly miserable would be a way to describe it. The leper's condition is horrendous, as they are unclean before God and under a curse in the community. And in the ancient world, the most cut off people in all of society were the lepers. Go ahead to the next slide there, Melinda. You can see the effect of the leprosy. And this particular picture off of the internet is not unlike what I experienced when I went to India and saw people without their fingers, without their digits, because their hands go numb. And in fact, I was talking to one man who was trying to get a lock off a door. And in that process of getting the lock off the door, not realizing that his hand was no hammer. And because of the numbness that he experienced in his hands and in his feet, his fingers would crumble off, and he saw that it was happening, but was unaware of the pain that most of us would have been aware of. Go ahead and put up the next slide. While we were at a leper colony there in India, there was a young man that was probably a few years younger than this particular man, but very like him in the sense that as we went out to the leper colony, you could sense that yes, there was something wrong with their body physically, but how it had taken over so much more of their spirit, of their identity, of who they were as a person. And when our group went out, and they hadn't really seen visitors from the outside, and particularly ones that were coming in from America, this was all strange to them. And so they wanted they wanted to tell their story. They wanted us to understand. And a young man, just a few years younger than this man, right in front of our group, grabs his shirt, crossed his arms, grabbed his shirt, pulls off his shirt so that we could see these boils that covered his body. So that we could understand both his physical condition, not that we were doctors that we could fix all of that, but that we could see and sense and feel with him in that moment. And our story today begins with Jesus encountering a leper, and I want you to notice something very, very interesting. It is immediately after the Sermon on the Mount. Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7, the greatest teaching from the greatest teacher in the history of the world. And he finishes his teaching, and he moves from the top of the mountain down into the valley. From word to deed. And you know the first century drill. The leper would have to say, "Unclean," he would shout, and he could touch no one, and no one could touch him. And there was this emotional loneliness, and relationally and socially, he had no support network and no family at his side, and he was the synagogue or the church, he was on the outside. And so this is his experience. And as a human being made in God's reflection, are we not made for love? And like the leper, many of us ask, what is wrong with me? Sometimes it's as if we were not made for this world, as many lepers would continually feel. I'm not made for this world. And so we have school shooters that are 16 and 17 and 18 years old who feel like they do not belong in this world. And in their hostility and in their anger and in their lack of belonging and their lack of engagement and their lack of social compatibility with those around them, they lash out. The FBI profile is that they are discontented, they are socially isolated, they lack empathy, and then they fantasize about these violent acts. So Mother Teresa says it this way, we think that sometimes poverty is only being hungry and naked and homeless. But isn't it not true that poverty of being, of identity, of being unwanted and being unloved and uncared for is the greatest poverty? So what is happening in Matthew chapter 8 in this little story about the leper is all of the Sermon at the Mount is being enacted, put into action. And I see the leper's faith, and it is honorable, and it is expressed in this daring willingness to trust God's abilities. And we could say in some ways it's a perfect encapsulation of faith. He says to Jesus, he says, Lord, if you are willing, if you want to, I respect you, and I have confidence that you can do it, and I do not demand it like some faith healers, because I know that you are God. But I also know that you are Lord. And so if you are willing, you can do it. I have confidence in your ability and in your competence, confidence that is unqualified. You see, sometimes we hear, well, just have faith. Well, just have faith. As if it is some generic leap. Faith in what? Faith in faith? Faith in faith will get you nowhere, no more than optimistic thinking. Now, believe me, I believe optimistic thinking is better than pessimistic thinking, okay? In most cases. But it is not what the Bible is talking about. It is talking about faith or trust or surrender or confidence in Jesus' ability to help us with our deepest problems. And this is where I would like you to put your faith this morning. That we go through Jesus. And as he has just finished the Sermon on the Mount, this great message, he was tired and he could have taken the afternoon off after preaching to watch the Cards game. And I wouldn't have blamed him for it because I know this experience quite well. But the text says he came down from the mountains and great crowds followed. And the man comes on his knees and he worships before him. And this is where the rubber meets the road, where good preaching without active compassion is meaningless. The preacher, the great preacher, practices what he preaches. And he did not heal the man from 6 feet away. He didn't heal the man by word alone. There is this believable ministry of the word accompanied by a compassionate ministry of deeds. This is the restoration movement. You want to talk about what the restoration movement is? It is when people on the outside are moved into the community of Jesus and have a relationship with Jesus Christ. The renewal of this man into the community of faith and the life of Israel, Jesus fulfills all of that. His words of authority are backed up by actions of authority as he is approachable and as he cares about this leprosy and as he reaches into the man's isolation and loneliness and helplessness and ostracization. And some texts say that he grabbed the man, touched the man, grabbed the man. Can you imagine touching a leper? The gospel is in that grasp for other people. That is the gospel, as Jesus initiates this act toward this man. And he breaks the rules, that is, Jesus does. Jesus violated the protocol by touching the man, and few acts would impact this man like the touch that go beyond this to make a difference. Touching the man went against the law according to Leviticus chapter 5 and verse 3. This made Jesus technically unclean. But it doesn't seem to matter to Jesus because he didn't care about those technicalities, or somehow he saw that as the Son of God, he was surpassed those technicalities, and it always seems as though it is the church people that get caught up on the technicalities. And Jesus touching the leper showed that he was not subject to the law, but above it and fulfilling it. And to the pure, all things are pure, and his purity absorbs the impurity of the leper. This is God's love in action. What kind of God do you believe in this morning? The results of that in the life of this man is that he has recognized that he is valuable. He is valuable. He is an invaluable child of the King. And then he is healed. And then he's no longer alone. He's invited in. And he said, Jesus saying, I will accept you and I'll dress your person with this good news of God's kingdom at every level, physical, emotional, social, spiritual, and he is restored back into fellowship with the community. This is a revolutionary movement where people who were excluded from the community, from the synagogue or the fellowship, are now brought in and they have a place. It's an amazing section of Scripture. Now, how many of you, I suppose all of us, have moments of leprosy? And by that I mean you want to belong and you want to be understood and you want to be accepted. However, even within this church community, you find yourself alone, or you find yourself misunderstood, or you found yourself rejected. You might feel like you're on the fringe. You might say, I'm different. I don't quite fit in. There's something about my background. There's something about my race. There's something about my clothes. There's something about my bank account. There's something about the car I drive. I want to be here, but I don't know how to be connected. And in our insecurity and in our insignificance, and we feel these feelings of slight, of rejection, sometimes we feel indifference. Nobody much cares. And if people are measured by their achievements or their abilities or their looks, is there any place for me when I'm feeling down and out? And maybe really to reverse the question, it is said this way: how do we engage the messy and the dirty and the sick and the disabled and the invalids? And in fact, it's on the front of your bulletin this morning, I put it this way: if our church looks pretty cleaned up, we need to repent. The church should have more messed up, unstable, screwed up people than any other organization on the planet. Some of you said, well, we're well on our way. All right, I hear you. You see, in working through this lesson, I identified a sinful place in my own heart. I realized I sometimes have an aversion to the needy. And in that, my defense mechanism, if you will, is to not permit myself to care, is to judge them, to cast aspersion on their motives, to look down on them, or to scorn them in some way so that I can stay at an arm's length. Who are the lepers today? How can the Jesus people reach the unwanted? How can we live the Sermon on the Mount? And most of this group, I presume, has a vibrant support network. I know that's not true for all, but what about those on the outside? What about those struggling right now, today, with physical deformities, with emotional scars, with mental instability? How comfortable is it for those, if you're a single mom or dad, to find a place in this fellowship? How do we do at ministering and welcoming in drug addicts and people with mental illness and those with autism and the school shooter profiles and sex trafficking victims? And our role as Jesus people is to bring this type of relationship to the poverty around us. Because here's the truth: you were a leper too, in need of God's mercy and grace. You were lost and cut off from God. So we got to stop being more spiritual than God. What do I mean by that? See, we care about some stuff that we define as spiritual, and that is to get with some good church people and to have the right teaching and to do some right living and to say our prayers and to send our kid to a Christian college and to give right and go to Sunday school. Well, okay, that last one's optional. All right. So we call all those spiritual things. And here we see that Jesus cares about the physical, the emotional, the relational, the restoration of a human being in God's world, God's cosmos, reintegrating the man into community. In other words, by saying we are more spiritual than God, we sometimes forget the whole person while he is interested in the whole person. So the invitation is we must go to the mountain to receive his word, and we must come down to the valley doing his work. You can tweet that one out if you want, if you got your phone there, okay? That'll work. But down in the valley with our feet and with our hands and with our hearts as well as our heads. Because let me tell you, and let me put it on the other foot for just a minute, you need a leper in your life too. To teach us, to give us perspective, to offer us insights we do not have, by being in a relationship with someone on the outside, on the fringe, one-to-one. This is the Jesus way. All right, could I illustrate then? And let me do that for just a moment or two. I suppose this past week we could illustrate with the tragic deaths of Kate Spade and celebrity chef Anthony Bourdain to speak to what looks seemingly okay on the big screen, to recognize there are often massive needs in our hearts and lives that are going unmet. It demonstrates the need and the challenge to be in the valley with the people where people are in ministry. And some of them are here at this church, and some of them are just a little ways away from you. And I invite you to be called into the valley just as Jesus was. I received this, I believe it was on Fox News actually, but somebody had tweeted it out earlier in the week, and it was by this man called Overcoming Misery. The Man with No Arms. The title of the article was Why Being Born Without Arms is Just About the Best Thing That Ever Happened to Me. Being a guy who was born without arms, he said, means that people are naturally curious about what life is like when you do everything with your feet. I get questions all the time, like, how do you brush your teeth? How do you drive? How do you put on your clothes? And he said, once people begin to get comfortable around me, one of the most common questions people will ask is, if you could choose to have arms, would you? While it's not just a cut and dry answer, I end up telling people no. Being born without arms might be the single greatest thing that has happened to me apart from my salvation, he says. God has taken a disability that many would see as a disaster and used it to mold and shape me as a man and as a believer. My disability and the pain that came with it has allowed me to see more distinctly the character of God. He comforted me and assured me and strengthened me when there seemed to be no source of hope. Amazing story. I'll give you the detail on the story if you'd like. He's a family man. He's got a couple of young kids in one of the other pictures. Think about overcoming misery. We've got Lewis and Joyce and family, children and grandchildren, and their fire that took place this past week, and we'll hear a couple more details from Brother Steve here in just a minute. How about another angle on this in terms of application for this body? We are putting in place at this church the McKnight Crossings sensory room. It's a room especially for children with special needs that might not have the capacity to sit through the worship or to be in Bible class. Children who may not fit into the standard classroom for all kinds of reasons, and there will be a classroom that we're going to be putting together up on the third floor with the idea that every child is recognized and we see you and we love you. Jody Mitchell, her idea, Jeremy Picker are heading up that project, and Jody already has an Amazon wish list that is ready to go to help set up that room. You see, the cross of Jesus Christ is the great act of God's initiative for the world. His initiative of love reaching to us, and we see that personalization of that love encapsulated in this story of Jesus reaching the leper in his helplessness. As he reaches us to you in your helplessness. And we say to him, if you are willing, and we have willingness to receive him by faith. So as we travel through Matthew's gospel this summer, I would like to hold up, on the one hand, the word of Jesus in Matthew's gospel and the needs of the city of St. Louis in the other. The Word of God, the Word of Jesus in the city of St. Louis. And our calling is to respond to Jesus in our time and our place. And I want to invite you to make that journey with me.